First of all, welcome, Meredith.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank
This is
you.
such a cool setup. I don't think I've done this before where I'm sort of talking in the round.
Yes,
so.
theater in the round. So
Great.
welcome to our theater.
It's great. And I was just saying, it's like, I love Chicago. I live in New York. I love Chicago. I am astonished by how hot it is
Indeed.
in September.
And I was just sharing my day started with failure.
Yeah.
So I go on a Strava run every morning, and I did not hit my desired time per mile, thanks to the humidity. But Meredith, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
And the crowd here is so happy to have you. We have over 500 technology leaders, a lot of them digital marketers, all about growing their brands through digital. And really, we thought no one better in the world than you, Meredith, to talk about how you do that at the New York Times. And I do think it's been one of the most amazing digital transformations in the world that you've led. And so I wanted to start there with digital transformation, how you've done that. And I think everyone knows who the New York Times is, yes? And first of all, it's not failing.
Thank you.
I read
Thank
your
you.
earnings.
Thank you.
You are growing and profitable.
Thank you.
And it is, I think, a lot of it thanks to your leadership. But I thought maybe we could start with this story when you were first contemplating joining the New York Times. I think it was about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And now it's very successful, but I imagine it was quite a scary choice at the time.
I was actually saying to Godard earlier that, so I've been at the Times for a little more than 6 years, and I spent 5.5 years at Forbes Media before that, and had a great run at Forbes, but I had gone there as a magazine publisher. So I'd gone there, as a sort of not as a digital person, and Forbes, in the time that I was there, became a digital company. And, at the point at which the Times had come to ask me if I wanted to interview to go there as head of advertising, I'd sort of fancied myself a digital person, and had kind of made myself, at least in my mind, into a digital leader. And when I went to seek advice from people on whether or not I should go to the New York Times, everybody said, it's not a digital company, you'll be going to spend the best years of your career sort of trying to make a contraction happen more slowly. And is that where you want to put your life energy? And its best days are behind it. And I have been a lifelong lover of the New York Times, of the brand New York Times, of quality, original, independent journalism. I'm not sure early in my life I would have described it that way, but I've just always loved serious journalism and the work of the Times. And so I had this very tortured decision to go. And I ultimately, I remember saying to my husband, I'm not doing it for the money, and because that won't happen. And I'm not doing it to sort of hone my digital chops because, it's not a digital company, but I just love the brand so much. And as it turns out, it's been all about it's been all about the digital world. And I'll just say, we often say to ourselves at the Times, we're not in the newspaper business, we're in the understanding business. And how we convey that today, how we deliver understanding is largely digitally.
So you made the leap of faith.
Yeah.
You really believed in the mission and the vision. Because the New York Times, I think it is more than a business, it's an institution. And I am one of your digital subscribers.
Thank you. Hopefully there are more in the room.
Yes, hopefully all of you, if you aren't yet.
Yeah.
I do love the journalism. But even going back further to your digital transformation, because we're talking backstage, but 10 years ago, how much of the New York Times was digital?
So I would say probably 80% of the business a decade ago came from newspaper advertising. By the time I arrived on the scene at the Times, we'd already lost probably half the value of our newspaper advertising business. Wow. And it's gone down further since then. So a decade ago, 80% of the revenue came from print advertising. Today, that is inside of a quarter. It's inside of a fifth of the revenue, which is amazing. And now almost 70% of the company's revenue comes from subscriptions. So it's a $1.7 billion company. It's a growing company, and more than $1 billion of that revenue comes from consumers who open up their wallets and pay us for a subscription.
Oh, that's just amazing, because so many companies are struggling with digital transformation, and you probably had one of the most dramatic ones. And I think most newspapers, sadly, many have failed, died, been consolidated. You all have managed to transform digitally and thrive. And now it's happening across industries. I think in every company is feeling pressure to become more digital.
Yeah.
But so I just want to get more insight, for other companies that are trying to transform digitally. I mean, how did you make this happen? How do you go from being a offline advertising print business to being an incredible digital company?
Well, let me put it in a little bit of context. So we essentially lost our distribution monopoly. Most newspapers, local newspapers and national newspapers, had some kind of distribution monopoly. It was hard for somebody else to come in and build the apparatus to get a newspaper at any scale to a group of people. So we lost that. And I would say sometime in the last, half dozen years, it also became clear that we wouldn't make up for the high margin newspaper ad business with digital advertising because of the dominance of the digital platforms. So we leaned very hard into being a subscription business first. We did that, like half a decade ago, at a time where that was pretty counterintuitive. So we put up a paywall for the New York Times, and the bet was that we made something that was of such real value to a large enough number of people that even when most of the alternatives were free, they would open up their wallets and pay for it. And in fact, that bet, we're not done yet, but that bet appears to be paying off. We're at just under 5 million total subscribers today. We're actually running the largest digital subscription business for news in the world. Anytime I start to feel really proud of those numbers, I think of the fact that Netflix has, 130 million subscribers, and Spotify has like 80 million. So we've still got a long way to go. But leaning into being a subscription business first proved to also be a lift to our ad business. We had to kind of reimagine what our digital ad business and our overall ad business was in a platform-dominated ad world. And there too, the secret sauce of the Times ad business is that we actually make something worth paying for, worth engaging with by consumers at scale, and there's really no substitute for that. Turns out marketers want to be associated with that too.
Wow, now that's incredible. So now you have 5 million subscribers, and as you said, it's also made your ad business much better.
Yeah.
Because you really know your subscribers, you can target them much better. It's just incredible. But I think you're also going beyond subscriptions. I saw now you're also going into TV and video journalism. I saw you launched The Weekly.
Yeah.
Just this year, and seems like an incredible new way to get your journalism out there. And how did you decide to do that, and how's that going?
Well, let me back up and say, I mentioned the notion we're not in the newspaper business. We're in the understanding business, and being in a digital world, a mobile world, an audio, a voice world means we can deliver that understanding in myriad ways. And it's interesting, when we were predominantly a newspaper, the major output mechanism for our value was a story, right? So when we were a newspaper, we published some large number of stories every day. Now we're publishing probably 150, 175 stories every day, but there's all this other value that's also being created in the very large newsroom of the New York Times all over the world that doesn't sort of, where the output mechanism of a story isn't sufficient to get that value in front of everybody. So the impetus for the weekly, which is our TV show, is actually the daily. So let me actually ask, are there daily listeners in the room? So lots of hands up. So the New York Times we didn't have an audio product, 2.5, 3 years ago. And today we actually have, The Daily is the largest podcast in America. It has more listeners every day at 2.5 years old than the weekday paper ever had subscribers. So it's a huge, huge new form of value that we're giving to people. But what's interesting is The Daily isn't another story. It's kind of the story behind the story. It's the surround sound to a story. So, when our reporters, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, break the Harvey Weinstein story, whatever it was, a year, 2 years ago, the next morning they're on The Daily telling the story of how after decades of rumors about Harvey Weinstein, they're actually able to go and get people like Ashley Judd to go on the record and tell that story. So turns out that the story of getting the story has real value. That's been the big insight of The Daily. People love listening to that. We assumed that if people like listening to that, they'd also like watching that, and there'd be an audience for it. So the TV show, The Weekly, which is running on FX Sunday nights at 10 o'clock and then streaming the next day on Hulu, was sort of born out of that idea. And we're 8 episodes in. It's basically one story at a time, and you follow the journalist in their pursuit of the story, and it really seems to be working.
Wow, no, I love that. So now you're telling the story behind the story, how your team is creating the stories, doing podcasts, video. It's amazing.
There's another thing that's happening in a sort of time where there are a lot of encroachments on the idea of what journalism is and what its purpose is. The Daily and The Weekly and mechanisms to sort of show the work of our journalists help actually build trust in the journalism and trust in the institution of the New York Times. So if you watch an episode of The Weekly and you watch our reporters in pursuit of the story and you see the way they go about making their decisions about who to talk to and what to do with that information, and the way that gets edited and the way that gets actually built into a story that's then presented to the world, it's hard to not see the great lengths that our journalists, our editors go to be fair in what we're portraying and to see the story from multiple angles. So it has the sort of dual purpose of exposing more people to journalism and sort of bringing journalism into new spaces in people's lives, but it also, I think, helps build trust in the institution of the New York Times.
Oh, that's a great point, Meredith. So they can really see how committed your journalists are, your reporters are to getting the story right and how hard they're working. And I think I can see how that can build trust, which is really the next theme I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
But before we do that, I also want to get all of you involved in the audience. So do you all know Slido? Yes. But go to slido.com. It's a great app where you can ask questions. And the code is NYT for New York Times. And please put in there the questions you'd like Meredith to answer, and you can also upvote them. And I will mix in your questions. So please go to Slido, code NYT, and submit your questions and vote on them, and I will ask her so hopefully we'll get some fun surprises as well.
Yeah, great. And if you're a subscriber, I'll answer 2 of them.
Wow, so mention that you're a subscriber. Your question will go to the top of the list. And if you aren't, you can subscribe right now on your phone.
Exactly.
But talking about trust, and it does seem like trust now, and there's all these surveys, trust is under attack in general.
Yeah.
People aren't trusting institutions, they aren't trusting newspapers anymore. And obviously I think we have some leaders very much attacking media, attacking trust. I imagine it must be really hard for you and your team to be under attack, but how do you still build trust? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Let me say a handful of things about that. The first one is just the idea that the President of the United States and others, have strong rhetoric about the press, and that rhetoric has sort of gotten stronger. So we went from the failing New York Times to fake news to enemy of the people, and most recently, essentially the President of the United States using the word treason to describe activities by the free press. So the first thing we do is, we speak out about that, and we go on record. Our publisher has met with the president. He's gone on record. He actually wrote, after the treason comment, he wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. It's a pretty big thing for the publisher of the New York Times to write an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, essentially talking about how dangerous that rhetoric is. And I want to say, not dangerous for the business or the stability of the New York Times, dangerous in the world.
Yeah.
If the President of the United States can do that, think about that, what that means for other world leaders, and think about just the peril that journalism is in general, and the significance of having an independent press able to hold power to account. So the first thing we do is we speak out and defend the right for the free press to exist, and for accountability journalism to exist and to be able to happen. The second thing we do goes to the thing I said before, which is to show the work. And I think the way this translates potentially outside of journalism to B2B tech or any other space is, I'll put it in business language, is we expose people to our supply chain. And I think in the world we're in today, like, whether you as a business choose to expose people to your supply chain explicitly or not, it's going to be exposed, because everybody can sort of see and find everything. And what I mean by that is we are really explicit about saying and showing people how we go about the work of the journalism. I just described how we do that on the daily, every weekday morning, how we do that on the weekly now, every Sunday night. If you use our app or you go to our website, you'll see increasingly we're showing you what's the dateline, where is the reporter, where are they on the ground, why do we have this story, what is the context for getting this story. And we've even gone so far as to make TV commercials about how our reporting happens. So we've got this now 2 years running truth campaign that we're doing, and we've got a body of work now that shows the lengths our reporters go to get the truth, and we literally make short films that run as TV commercials to show the pursuit of that work. So just showing the work, exposing people to the supply chain, I think is really important. And then the last thing I'll say, and I think this applies to any company, any brand, you actually have to really know what your own values are, and then see that your work and your supply chain for delivering that work to the world demonstrate those values. And so I'll just say, at the Times, in the last 3-4 years, we've gone through 2 really big exercises, one to sort of establish what our brand principles were, and the other to establish what our values as a company were, and how we do the work. And in both, we spend 1,000 hours trying to get to a very small number of words that the whole company, and frankly the whole world, could easily understand sort of what we stood for. And I'll just give one example, which is after the election of 2016, there were many people in the world, and even some inside the company, who wanted the New York Times key value to serve as the opposition to the party who had just come into power, or the leader who had just come into power. And in fact, that is not our value. Our value is holding power to account whoever is in power, and accountability journalism, and doing that in an independent way. So having gone through that process of defining our values allowed us to sort of say to the world, the value isn't being the opposition to the administration. It is, in fact, to hold power to account in any scenario.
No, that's fascinating. So really your mission, yes. But really your mission is to hold power to account no matter who is in power.
Yeah, and I'll just say, play it out the other way. If we, in fact, were the opposition, like if our purpose was to be the opposition to one administration, when the next one comes into power, how are you not the lapdog?
Right.
To whoever the other party is.
Yeah. No, and I think, and also personally, and I know, well, you and I have become friends, but also growing up in Germany and still 1970s, we still had the wall.
Yeah.
And obviously seeing the other side, even East Germany, right? But when you don't have anyone to question power, we've certainly all seen that tends to lead to horrible outcomes. And so I'm glad you're doing what you're doing. And I also like what you said about trust. It sounds like really the key, also New York Times, you're trying to create more transparency about how you create the story. And I think that's something we can all work on. And at G2, one of the things we do, maybe less controversial, but sometimes to our vendors very controversial, but we rate software products.
Yeah.
Based on reviews from customers. And then what is sometimes controversial is, who do you make number one? And it is largely obviously based on customer voice, but then we have to apply some algorithm, right, to say how much do you weight this review versus that review, recency, quantity, quality.
Yeah.
So it is a bit tricky. And I think one thing we're trying to figure out is how some people are like, hey, publish your whole algorithm.
Yeah.
Which we haven't done. I mean, we do publish, here's the drivers, but I think it's something in every business, I think we can do more of, right? Create more transparency to build more trust.
Yeah, and let me add to that, and I think this applies to G2's business, and it certainly applies to journalism. The pursuit of truth, the act of reporting, the act of reviewing something, these are human endeavors. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we have become much more explicit in doing at the Times is not just showing how the work happens, but getting people involved with the human beings who are doing it. Yes. So when Michael Barbaro, the host of The Daily, is telling a story or interviewing somebody about a story, he is there as your personal sort of guide to understanding a particular topic or a story. And we're also exposing you to the reporter who's pursuing the story, and you get a chance to sort of see and understand who is this human being and kind of what's their interest in it. And to us, that's exposing our supply chain. And I think, we're going to make our businesses scalable in part through algorithms, but what are the algorithms doing? They're helping surface the most relevant work from human beings. So making sure that the sort of humanity in that process and the individuals who are actually powering it can be known by the end user is a really important part.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So really, because it is all humans, right? Whether they're writing a story or they're writing a review. And I think we do also on G2, one of the things we've tried to do is always tie the review to a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
And ideally with a picture, so you can see the human, you can see their professional context.
And even this is a real person. This is someone who has expertise.
This is not a bot, right? It's a real human. Here's their context. And also everything we write, all our stories, they're always about context, right? What's the context of that human? And getting more of that context, I think, does help us all build trust and just connect with each other more.
Yeah.
But it is harder to do digitally. And that's, I think, why we still do live events like this, right? Because we get to meet each other and it's easy to build trust, but it's a lot harder to do that online. And so I am curious, and most of us, we're building digital brands, we're digital marketers, obviously bringing out the human, but are there other tips you have to building trust?
Yeah, I think, I'll answer that question in the context of as a marketer, how do you do that? I would say we have been incredibly focused. So now I'll talk about the New York Times as a brand ourselves. When I got there, Times wasn't a big marketer. Today we spend real media money. We've put a lot of effort and weight into our brand. We have Droga 5 is our ad agency. We make a lot of TV commercials. So we put a lot of time and thought into all of that. But part of how we think about getting more people to use our brand, buy our brand, trust our brand, is actually investing in the experience of the brand itself. And I think in general, we obviously have a very large ad business at the New York Times, and we see this happening with our partners in the ad business as well. There is much more work going on today in what we used to call like below the line marketing than at any point in my 2.5 decades of working as a marketer. So so much more investment, so many more people at companies are now spending time on the product itself, the experience itself, making sure that the full value of that experience can be realized, whether it's through customer service or the journey somebody takes to transact with you, or the experience they have just after they buy, or how they onboard. And I would say we as the New York Times, a consumer brand, are investing vastly more in people and dollars than we ever have in that. Obviously in the journalism, but also in the sort of experience around that. And we see in the marketers we work with on the ad side of our business, much more money, people, effort, weight going to just the experience with a product versus just telling the story of a product. And I sort of can't say enough about that. The other thing I'll say, and this is very specific to the New York Times, we've got sort of a practice that is in good times or in bad times, the first dollar at the New York Times always goes to the journalism, because ultimately the vast majority, of value in our product is in reporting, the reporters, the ability to pursue a story, the ability to fact check that story and edit it with, professional grade judgment. And so, when we think about investing in building our brand, building our customer base, the first dollars of that investment are always going to go into the journalism. When I got to the company, I think our newsroom was like 1,350, 1,400 people, and today it's past 1,700 people. So we are still pouring money and resources and commitment and energy into the work of reporting.
But obviously the work you're doing on the business side, the amazing thing is that is allowing you to actually have more reporters. So you said you grew from 1,300 to 1,700 reporters?
Yeah, and just to put that in context, unfortunately, in the last, I want to say 12, 13, 14 years, I think half of all of the working journalists in the United States have lost their job. The facts look similar as you go out around the world. So journalism in this country and around the world, particularly independent, quality, original journalism, is in crisis. Local journalism in particular is in crisis. And so we are very focused on how do we keep investing in it, and what are the things we can do to sort of help the supply of journalism broadly across the United States and around the world.
Yeah. Now, I remember I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I think they used to have like the Post-Gazette, and they had two newspapers, and now I think they're almost both gone.
Yeah.
Or they're not able to afford hiring local reporters and really creating that content anymore. But it's great that you guys are doing that. And
it's a real problem. And the supply of journalism, particularly quality journalism, is going down.
Yeah.
The demand for journalism has never been higher.
Right.
We are living in incredibly consequential times. And it goes far beyond sort of the politics story in the United States at this moment, and populism more broadly, climate change, the tech transformation of everything, the future of work. We are living in a time of such profound change. I don't think the need for journalism at the local level, at the national level, at the global level is going to abate anytime soon. So it's a real issue that there isn't enough of it in the world.
True. Now, I think that more and more people are now going online to get that insight. Right? They don't have the local newspapers, so they're going online. They're finding it through social media. But obviously, there you never know what you're going to get, right? You don't know if it's good information, bad information. I think that's the real value you add. I mean, you guys make sure, obviously, you have hardworking journalists who tell the story, the best possible way. And so that, I love that you guys are doing that. I did want to now see what's coming up in the Slido to see what questions you all have for Meredith. So I'm going to pull out my phone, and we'll see who's subscribing already.
All right.
Hopefully I'll be able to tell on the Slido app. Although maybe we should talk about privacy. That might be a violation of your privacy if I knew. But if you share it yourself, and that's the key, right? Opt in. As long as you opt to share that you're a subscriber, right, then I will know.
That's right.
Okay, so we have a lot of great questions upvoted here. And I'm going to go to the second question first, because it's still more in the theme we're on right now, which is around digital marketing, media, building trust. And this question is, how do you balance your freemium offering with the paywall to ensure you're optimizing subs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say that goes squarely into like what I and my team spend, gobs and gobs of time on. We are in the business sort of first and foremost of scaling direct relationships with users and ultimately paying relationships. So it would actually be very easy for the New York Times to just, harden and harden and harden the paywall, to kind of harvest a lot of interest in the Times that exists today and improve conversion today. But if we only do that, we run the risk of not continuing to fill the coffer of a deeply engaged audience who will subscribe tomorrow as well and who can engage with our products. So a lot of our work is about figuring out how do we actually build relationships with people such that we can unlock more value to them in our product, and then ultimately get them to subscribe. At the moment, we're doing a lot of work around literally just the mechanic, and I would imagine a lot of the businesses represented in the room are doing this, just the mechanic of building a direct relationship. And today, that's best manifest by getting someone to register and log in on the New York Times. So by the way, if you don't want to pay, at least go and make an account with us, register and log in. And right now, depending on what channel you come from, you register and log in, and that unlocks an opportunity to read or watch or listen to much, much more of the New York Times. We also, I'll say in a mobile world, what's the manifestation of a direct relationship? It's being present on the home screen of someone's phone. So if we can get you to download our app, you are much more likely. If we can get you to register, you're more likely to subscribe. If we can get you to download our app, you're much more likely to subscribe. And then when you register and you come back and you log in, we can do a much better job of exposing you to the stuff that should have the most value to you. So one of the big product challenges at the New York Times is we publish 150, 175 stories a day, and on a small screen, on a mobile phone, it is very hard to expose all that value to you in a way that you can sort of quickly get to that which is going to be most important and then most interesting to you. So the more you make yourself known to us and will engage in a relationship with us, the better we can do about that. So I would say we are really balancing sort of putting up enough friction to encourage people to pay, with trying to build long-term relationships. And at this moment, leaning a bit harder into the building long-term relationships.
Yeah. So really you're doing a lot like a lot of us were more SaaS software vendors. And I know one of them here, HubSpot, who Ryan, our CMO, came from, but they've also been very big on this, right? So it sounds like you put some free content out there, but then the next tier, hey, you register, you start building a relationship, and you get some content for free, and then ultimately, once you love the content, then you get them to subscribe.
Yeah,
kind of your journey.
Let me add two more things to that. It's the New York Times. Yeah. We're mission first. We're a subscription first business. But even before that, we have a mission to provide truth and understanding as broadly as we can. So there will always be a fair amount of New York Times journalism available to the public at large. In that context, figuring out how we can have enough value, we make something that is worth paying for to a lot of people. How can we have enough value in sort of compelling people to pay. That's the sort of balancing act. And what I would say is you need to be able to do both of those things.
And one more follow-up question related to this. I know you come out to Palo Alto a lot and also deal with the tech giants.
Yeah.
Facebook, Google. And I know one challenge with your content, anyone providing content, how much does Google or Facebook, how much of their content do they get to use, right? And obviously you have the benefit, they drive traffic, but then maybe they're also using your content for free. And especially in Europe, I think they're talking about now taking some of Google's or Facebook, having them paid publishers like yourself. I mean, what's your take on that whole dynamic?
Yeah. Let me sort of broadly say, I think the best place to experience New York Times journalism is on the owned and operated platforms of the New York Times. And that means on our app, on our website, watching our television show, listening to the Daily, because there you get you get a story, you get its context, you get the surround sound, you understand the supply chain for how we got to that story. I think in the platform world, stories are often distributed without their context, without an understanding of all of the things that I just described, without, if the day the Mueller report drops, we've got a dozen stories about it. We can guide you through which to read, depending on what you're looking for, how it all fits together. Or if you go to social media, how do you know you're sort of finding the most useful to you angle into that story? So I want to say the platforms play a very important role in helping us develop our audience, play a very important role in sort of keeping our brand out there. But fundamentally, news is a relationship business, and the best place to experience quality journalism, which is not just content, but actually an experience of quality journalism, is on the owned and operated experience of that quality journalism provider. I'd like to say it should be the New York Times for everyone in the room, but whatever your choice is, the best thing you can do for that news organization, and I think for yourself as a consumer of journalism, is to engage on that platform. Right. So you just get more of the value.
Yeah. So get the New York Times mobile app on your home screen.
Yeah.
I have it there.
Yeah.
And so that's some great insights there. And I think that the number one question right now is really also about leadership. And also, obviously, you're an incredible leader, but also an incredible female leader. I think, probably one of the most influential female leaders now in media and technology. And so what advice do you have, for younger women in the room in technology that aspire to build a career like you've had? What's your advice?
I mean, I would say to everyone, I don't know that I'm in a position to dole out advice, but I can tell you what I've sort of, some of the big lessons of my own career have been, I've been working now for, I'm 48, so 25, 26 years, a long time. And I would say I spent most of the first half of my career very carefully kind of playing not to lose, playing not to piss anybody off. And, a theme for the whole time has been just working my butt off. But, I spent so much time trying not to do the wrong thing, trying not to get fired, trying not to make enemies. And sort of midway through, about a dozen years ago, I was like the number 2 at a media company and the number 2 business executive. The top job came open, and the short version of the story is it was not obvious that I was the right candidate for that job. And as I sort of looked at myself, it was because I had worked so hard kind of not to lose. And it was this like defining moment of my career. I left that company. I actually didn't participate fully in the process to see if I'd get that next job. I left, I went to another company and basically decided very proactively that from there forward, I would do the best I could to sort of do great things in business and sort of not fight to be liked, not fight to never piss anyone off. And I would say the second half of my career has been much more fun and much more fruitful as a result of that. So I think that's my advice. It's all scary, but you would for me, you'd much rather be associated with being bold and having it not go well, even very publicly, than sort of not standing for an original or big idea to begin with.
Wow.
And I would also just say to the women in the room and the men, if you want to be a boss, you have to behave like a boss, which means holding people accountable for results and saying very simply what the standard is and what kind of result you want, and then seeing that those things happen. And I don't think that's gender specific. I think that's just being a boss.
Indeed. No, that's great advice. And I think what you said was at some point learning to be bold, just fully putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
Even if it's scary.
Yeah. I'll say one more thing, which, besides working really hard has defined my career experience, which is hire people who are smarter than you. At a certain point in your career, particularly when you get to a level of sort of senior management and then executive management, you're not there for your expertise. You're there because you can lead other people to sort of expose the full value of their expertise and to get a team of people who are all domain experts at something working together. You're conducting the orchestra. You're not the first chair trumpet. And just like every day reminding yourself that, I would say the people who work for me now, each one of them is vastly superior to me in their ability to run their domain and frankly to work with the others. It's just my job to see that together they can get to the right level of output.
Now that is great advice. And I have an ego, so I never like to say someone's smarter than me, although there are smarter people. But I love the point in their domain.
Yeah.
And especially, and that's actually this whole event, like Ryan and his team, our digital marketing team we put together, they're so much better at this than I could ever be.
Yeah.
I can never even envision an event or digital. And I think that's something I've also learned is that, if we get the right leaders in place and trust them, and we're talking about OKRs, right? Set their key results.
That's right.
Give them the resources and then hold them accountable. And then you can do so much more as a leader.
I think that's right. I would also say in my present experience, a very big lesson that we as a team at the New York Times are learning is just the real value of what I call lateral leadership. So it is almost more important today, if you're a product leader, an engineer, a marketer, a data scientist, that you can actually lead side to side, that you can work cross-functionally to maximum effect than it is that the bosses like you, or even that you can motivate your team. We are in a moment where being able to perform cross-functionally, often without actual line authority for other people or any expertise in their domains, is the most important thing.
No, I totally agree. I think we're calling lateral leadership to be effective inside a company. And also, I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, which I've done a few times, but I think the most important thing for starting my own first company was actually I had a lateral network. I was working at another Silicon Valley company called Niku, but I remember I built a very lateral network. So then when I was in my next company, I knew engineers, right? I was more in business development, but I knew people in engineering, I knew people in marketing, and had friends, peers that trusted and respected each other. And then you can have so much more impact, and you can also be a much better entrepreneur inside or outside your company.
That's right.
That's some amazing advice.
We're living in a time where so much about the markets that we're all operating in is underdetermined, which means the work is fundamentally software driven. Even if it's creative, it's going to be distributed by software and therefore iterative. And so being able to do that across functions over and over again is so much more important at this point than sort of top-down command and control.
I agree. And in each of those areas, there's so much more expertise needed.
Yeah.
There's so much more software, so much more advanced methods that, there's no way any of us could learn even, a small percentage of them. So
That's
I think
right.
You're right. It's
I'll just say, because there are many marketers in the room, the way that plays out in marketing is I often say to our people, it's not about the size of your team or the size of your budget. It's what is the impact you're having on the whole of the product experience. And I do think that is a very big change coming to the discipline and the domain of marketing.
Well, no, thank you for all that wisdom, but we're going to do one more question. And I always like this question. It's one of the top voted questions, but what's the biggest mistake you've made, and what did you learn from it?
I feel like many people say this because it's true. So I'm going to say it. Not spending enough time and being sharp on talent decisions. I will say at a certain level, probably everyone in the room is at this level. If you're here at this conference, at a certain level, if you are managing people, the most important thing you can do is make sure you have the right people in the right jobs and that you've created the conditions for them to succeed. And that means if someone isn't right or the role isn't right, moving swiftly to correct that. Often, that can mean changing the contours of the job, or sometimes it means somebody isn't the right fit for the organization. Getting at that quickly is, I've made the mistake a number of times in my career where I didn't get at that fast enough. The drag on your team of not having the right leader in the right place is so significant. The cost is huge. The flip side of that is not spending enough time and energy in the recruiting process to make sure you get the right people from the outset. And I would just say to all the leaders in the room, I probably spend 40% of my time just on people and recruiting, creating the conditions to make sure we can get, particularly in product engineering, data design, can we attract the right people to the New York Times? Do we have the conditions that they can come and do their best work? Are we paying them the right way? Are they set up to work with one another the right way? And if you aren't spending like a giant swath of your time on that, or if I'm not as a leader, I'm not doing the right thing.
No, thank you, Meredith. And I think I couldn't agree more. It is all about the talent.
Yeah, talent is everything.
And we're so glad to have so many talented people here in the room, and look forward to getting to know all of you. But I wanted to really thank Meredith coming all the way out here from New York. I know you have another 2 more speaking engagements the next 2 days. And thank you so much for coming out here, spending the time with us. And it's been amazing learning more about your story. And I can't wait to see also where you go next, because I know you're just getting started as one of the world's best leaders.
Thank you,
Meredith.
Godard. Thank you all for having me.
Thank
Read
you.
the New York Times.